My experience in Islam began as a university student in New York City in 1998. Up to that point when my life, for 25 years, had been Protestant, but I didn't practice my life religion for a long time. I was more interested in spirituality, and looked for anything that had nothing to do with it with organized religion. For me, Christianity it was out of reach and not relevant to the time. It was hard to find something that I could apply to my life every day. This disillusion with Christianity led me to close the doors to everything that seemed to be organized religion, because of my assumption that it was all the same, or at least in terms of lack of relevance and clarity. Much of my frustration with the Christianity came from his lack of knowledge and orientation in relation to the nature of God and the individual relationship with Him. Towards Christian philosophy depended on this bizarre intermediate relationship that we owe Jesus, who on the one hand was a man, but he was also divine. However, this difficult and very vague relationship with our Creator made to look for something that could provide me with a better understanding of God and our relationship with Him. Why couldn't I pray directly to God? By that He had to begin every prayer with, "In the name of Jesus Christ?" As an eternal Creator and Sustainer, and does omnipotent also take the form of a man? Why would He need to do it? These were just some of the questions He couldn't solve. I really needed a more objective, direct and clear approach of religion that could provide my life with true guidance, not just with a dogma that was devoid of real knowledge based on fact. When I was in graduate school, I had a Jewish roommate at the time who was studying martial arts. While we lived together, he studied an art called Salat, a traditional Malaysian martial art that is based on the teachings of Islam. When my roommate came home from Salat classes, I had told about the uniqueness of Salat and its rich spiritual dimension. I was very interested in learning martial arts at the time. I was intrigued by what I heard and decided to accompany my roommate to class a Saturday morning. Though I hadn't realized at that time, my experience in Islam was beginning that morning in my first Salat class in New York City, on February 28, 1998. There I met my teacher, Cikgu, which means teacher in Malaysian, the man who would transmit my foundation and guidance to Islam. Although I thought I was starting a career as a practitioner, that day in 1998 did indeed represent my first step in the direction to become a Muslim. From the beginning I was intrigued by the Salat and Islam and began to spend as much time as possible with my teacher. Since my roommate and I were in love with Salat, we went to my teacher's house and absorbed as much knowledge as possible from him. In fact, when we completed graduate school in the spring of 1998, we spent the entire summer living with him and his wife, at his invitation. As learning in Salat increased, it increased also my learning about Islam, a religion about which I had very little knowledge before my experience in Salat. Which made my orientation to the Islam was so powerful that it was learning about it and it was also experiencing. As I studied at my teacher's house, being in the presence of devout Muslims allowed me to be constantly surrounded by the sounds, sights, and practices of Islam. As the Islam is a whole lifestyle, when you are in an Islamic environment it can separate you from everyday life. Unlike the Christianity, which tends toward a separation of daily life and religion, Islam it requires his followers to integrate the worship of God into everything they do. Thus, when living with my teacher I was immersed in the Islamic din and I experienced firsthand how it can shape the entire way of life of a person. In the beginning Islam was very new, different and powerful for me. It was also very strange in many ways and the amount of discipline it requires was difficult to understand. At the time I was very liberal and I was accustomed to abandoning anything dogmatic or imposed, regardless of his author. As time goes by passed, however, and my understanding of Islam grew, I began to see slowly what seemed to be religious dogma was actually the lifestyle established for us by our Creator, or the Arabic term, din, of God. This lifestyle, I later learned, is the straight path for true contentment, not the sensual and superficial way of life that my society and culture promote. I realized that in the question is very simple. Who could know better than the omniscient Creator? What is the best way of life for beings human? From the day of my first Salat class in New York until the day I took my Shahada, July 30, 1999, I spent by a deep self-examination that comprised two great experiences. One was the process of questioning the culture I grew up in, and the second was to struggle to understand the true nature of God and the role of God. Religion in my daily life. As for my culture, it wasn't as difficult as most people think. For me, who grew up in America, it took an experience powerful, a gifted teacher, and the right knowledge to experience the truth. American culture is very powerful because constantly bombards with sensual gratification. Unless we are removed from it, it is difficult to see its limitations, based on the worship and faith in everything except God, the only one who can provide us with support real and lasting in our lives.